Television Network.
Zimbabwe's army on the spot over post-poll killings. Concerns as violence persists in the Democratic Republic of Congo 5 days to election day. And voting is underway in Madagascar's presidential poll. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. Me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business news, dozens of African leaders gather in Vienna for the EU-Africa Summit. And in your sport, the African club champions ES Tunis secure a 5th place at the Club World Cup. We begin in Zimbabwe, where earlier this year the military was accused of using live bullets to quell post-election violence. 6 protesters and bystanders died and dozens of others were injured. Now, an inquest into the fatal shooting squarely blamed the military and the police. The reports say the military's use of force was disproportionate and unjustified. CGTN's Tulisha Balala has more.
Zimbabweans were awaiting the presidential results with anticipation. But on August 1st, violence broke out in the capital, Harare. Citizens and members of the security forces clashed. Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa set up a commission of inquiry to investigate the violence.
The commission's finding on a balance of probabilities from all the evidence received is that the deaths of these 6 people and injuries sustained by the 35 others arose from the actions of the military and the police.
The investigation found the deployment of the military was legal. But the soldiers should have operated under police command. They used whips and rifle butts against the protesters.
The use of live ammunition directed at people, especially when they were fleeing, was clearly unjustified and disproportionate.
Ordinary Zimbabweans are satisfied with the findings.
It was quite a balanced report, but at the same time, it did not come up with conclusions as to who did what exactly.
I think the commission of inquiry was necessary. Zimbabwe is a democratic country. The president has also shown that he has those people at heart, since he decided to let people comment in the people to do the inquiry.
The inquiry, led by former South African President Kgalema Motlanthe, has also accused some opposition movement for democratic change leaders of inflaming tensions, as well as fomenting protests that it said were pre-planned. Meanwhile, the MDC has dismissed the report. It says Emmerson Mnangagwa's government is trying to whitewash the army's actions. Tulisha Balala, CGTN.
Well, let's get more on this now from CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya. He's in Harare for us. Farai, can you give us more details about this probe and the reactions from Harare?
Well, Beatrice, certainly I think very eagerly awaited. People wanted to know what the outcome of this inquiry, this 3-month-long inquiry, would be. People followed very closely the public hearings, which were televised live here. And I think what most people are saying is that it is a quite fair and balanced report. The findings that have been put forward and been arrived at by this commission tally pretty much with what people saw in terms of video and the MDC or some of the MDC leadership have been, pointed out as, some of the speech, some of the things that were said may have incited this violence. There hasn't been direct blame put on any individuals or any particular people within the MDC. So it's not really a political witch hunt. And I think in terms of apportioning the blame or the responsibility in terms of what happened, I think many people feel that the report has actually done that. There are some who are a bit disappointed, who felt that, they didn't go far, the report didn't go far enough. They would have wanted people named, the actual people who gave the commands to shoot, the actual soldiers and police officers who fired. They would have wanted some of those people named and perhaps brought to book. But I think that will then perhaps be the next step of this process, where recommendations have now been brought forward, and now the next step will now be taken forward. But I think in many ways people saying it's important that this process happened, that it answers the questions, crucial questions, and that it will bring this process to finality, but also help the country move forward. I just want to point out, Beatrice, that one of the key things that has also come out of this report is the need for healing, national healing, reconciliation, the need to reconcile the people of Zimbabwe, heavily polarized, deeply divided. And, you know, that's a key recommendation that came through, that despite all that happens, despite people who might be held to account, prosecuted going forward, perhaps there is a need for Zimbabweans to be brought back together and to be united, and for a healing process to take place.
Farai, so now that the report is out, what next? Is the government planning on prosecuting those named in the report, or what happens after this?
Well, Beatrice, yesterday President Emmerson Mnangagwa said that he has received the report. He and his government are now analyzing it, they are going through it, and they are considering some of the recommendations that were put forward by this commission. We expect that going forward there will now be action being taken on some of those recommendations. But the report also pointed out that there is need for the security forces themselves, the army and the police, to undertake their own exhaustive internal investigations to get to the bottom and to identify some of these officers who may have acted outside of the chain of command, outside of the rules of engagement, and engaged in some of these actions that led to these deaths, for the army and the police to identify those perpetrators and to sanction them appropriately. So we expect that if those recommendations are taken on board, that there will be these investigations within the army, within the police, but also for the government, once they have fully considered this report and its recommendations, to now come up with a way forward in terms of what they'll do next.
And how about compensation, Farai? Any plans to compensate the victims and their families?
Well, certainly one of the recommendations that came through was for a compensation fund to be set up, for compensation to be awarded to victims of the violence, those who survived, those who sustained injuries, but also the families of those who lost their lives, so they can get some sort of compensation and financial support, that there should be assistance to those who are still carrying some of these injuries. We know in particular there is one person who was shot who still has a bullet lodged within their body, that they should get medical assistance, financial assistance, in order to be able to foot those medical bills and be able to move forward. So we expect that the government will move quite quickly on that recommendation, which I think is in order and which many people do welcome. But I think also crucially, as I mentioned earlier, the need for national healing, for a process of mediation, so that even though we get to the bottom of what happened here, going forward, Zimbabwe never sees events like this before, because they were largely because of political differences, and many people saying that Zimbabwe is much bigger than individual interests. No politician is worth dying for, and so let's make sure that people are brought together, are reconciled, and so we never have scenes like that again, Beatrice.
Right, Farai Mwakutuya in Harare. Local media sources say a deadly shooting involving the Federal Army, which took place inside Ethiopia's Moyale town, has claimed the lives of at least a dozen civilians. The conflict in the area has continued claiming lives and displacing thousands of people. The government says, though, it is making a series of interventions. Still, the violence has continued taking lives. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala.
Local media has reported the insecurity in Ethiopia's Moyale town is showing little signs of returning to normalcy. It is not clear what triggers the latest shooting, which claimed at least 13 lives and wounded many more. Last week, 21 people were killed in the same area and more than 60 were wounded due to a fresh violence that erupted between the Oromo and Somali ethnic groups. Reports suggest that thousands are seeking refuge crossing the border in Kenya. Ethiopian government sources have confirmed both the regional administrations of Oromia and Ethiopia-Somalia are working to return peace to the area and bring criminals to justice. But still, authorities admit the success rate of that intervention is below average. They said people are getting killed every day, and a serious federal government measure is mandatory. The Moyale violence is a result of a series of ethnic clash between ethnic Oromo and ethnic Somali communities since years back on the border with Kenya. The fighting appeared to be caused by a long-standing dispute over land possession rights. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
To Nigeria now, where a huge fire has engulfed Ogbi Ijo market. There are reports that some residential and commercial houses have been affected in the fire, which is said to have begun at about 3:30 a.m. on Wednesday. Now let's cross over to CGTN's Deji Badmus. He's got the latest for us. Deji, can you give us an update on the latest? Do we know what caused the fire and the extent of the damage?
Yes, Beatrice, I mean, it's just a pure case of vandalism. There is a pipeline around this area. If you look right behind me, that is where the fire actually started from. Now, right behind me is where the vandals actually drilled a hole on the pipe, and then there was a leakage. And then what happened was the fuel just ran through the drainage around the community, and before the people, I mean, the residents around knew what was happening, the whole place had been engulfed by fire. And something I just want to explain to you, Beatrice, is that the vandals who did this were very smart. What they did was to build a small shop around the pipeline area. And so they worked here, at least possibly. What we have at the moment is that you have the security agencies, men of the security agencies, and of course, men from the state's petroleum company now trying to bring the situation under control. Of course, the fire has been put out, but the leakage is what they're trying to control. It's a terrible situation. A number of residential houses were affected. Commercial properties affected. As a matter of fact, we saw a car lot that was completely burnt. I mean, a place where cars are sold, the cars completely burnt. So a lot of people affected, to be candid. And you know the funniest thing, this is not the first time this incident will be happening around here. It has happened in the past, but people are still asking questions. Why none of the residents suspected something was going on inside that shop? And you can see the shop is burnt, and it's a very terrible situation. But of course, it's been brought under control.
All right, Deji Badmus for us there in Nigeria, in Lagos. Thank you. Let's now go to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where one person has been shot dead at an anti-Kabila protest. The incident took place just 5 days ahead of a crucial presidential election. The victim was a woman at a market in the restive central Kasai region. She was shot in the head by soldiers when they opened fire to disperse demonstrators. The deteriorating security situation in the DRC is a major concern for many Congolese.
If I sleep well, have peace, security, and go home whenever I want, and my children go to school, I will say that I have a good president.
All these years we have lived in war, poverty, unemployment, and our children have not learned.
And staying in the DRC, while security is a major concern ahead of the national elections, youths in the country are hoping the polls will go ahead with little trouble. For most, it will be the first time they engage in a democratic process to elect their leader.
Journalism student Jenny is doing internship at an independent TV station in Kinshasa. At 19 years old, the only president she has ever known is the incumbent Joseph Kabila. Having attained the minimum age established by law to vote, she is pleased to have a say on who will be the next president.
It's the first time that I'm allowed to vote. I want to see what it means to cast your vote. I want to see what it's like to change the president, the ruling class.
Youth make up half of the Democratic Republic of Congo's population. 21-year-old stylist Caprice dreams of one day launching her own fashion brand. She believed the country's politics have no effect on her aspirations.
For me, it doesn't matter much whether Kabila leaves or stays in power, or whether anyone takes his place. It all just leaves me cold.
2,000 kilometers east of Kinshasa in the city of Goma, campaigns are taking place amid fear of raids by armed groups. 23-year-old Jackson is a local bicycle courier. He earns just $1 or $2 per delivery, just about enough to support his wife and 3 children. His main hope is peace and is troubled ahead of the vote.
The rebels have to leave the forest and stop the killings. That's what we're hoping for from the new president.
Access to job markets is one of the top concerns for Congolese youth. Many also want better representation from leaders. But in a country that has never had peaceful transition of power, a smooth election would be a good start to ensure hope and prosperity for their future. Richard Surunta, CGTN.
To another election, and voters have begun casting their ballots across the Indian Ocean island nation of Madagascar to select a new president in a runoff election that pits 2 former leaders against each other. Andry Rajoelina received 39% of the vote in the first round in November, while Mark Ravalomanana got 35%. They face off for the first time since a political turmoil in 2009 forced Ravalomanana from power. Both have said they will accept the runoff's results. 10 million voters are registered in Madagascar. Well, it is the first time the 2 candidates have faced each other at the ballot. But the rivalry has dominated life on the island for years. CGTN's Penina Karibe has more.
Both former mayors, both former presidents, both self-made, both incredibly wealthy. But the history between these 2 is a bitter one. Mark Ravalomanana was forced from power in 2009 and forced into exile following a coup led by Andry Rajoelina. The standoff cast Madagascar into political and economic turmoil, and the 2 were banned from running in the 2013. Has dismissed Ravalomanana as too old to revive Madagascar. Both have pitched big plans should they win. Rajoelina's promises include solar power for every home on the island and to have cow theft, one of Madagascar's priority crimes. Ravalomanana is promising free education up to 16 years and universal healthcare. They both know their electorate, the electorate know them. Voters are hoping not just that the winner can deliver, but that the loser can accept the result. Penina Karibe, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. A UN mobile court brings legal justice to South Sudan for the first time in more than 4 years. And there's uproar over Disney's move to trademark Hakuna Matata phrase. We look at Africa's take on the matter.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
A UN-supported mobile court has begun hearing cases in South Sudan's remote town of Bentiu. The courts bring back legal justice to the town for the first time in more than 4 years. Legal proceedings will see 27 suspects go on trial over a period of 2 weeks. The last official session was held in December 2013 before civilians and court officials fled the civil war that left almost 400,000 people dead. The mobile court comprises of 2 judges, 2 prosecutors, 1 investigator, and 2 defense lawyers.
We are working on the judicial system so that the accused can be tried first. They should either be charged or released if they did not commit a crime. They should only be in jail if they did something wrong. No one should be held without a trial, which would mean that justice is delayed. There are places, including Bentiu, where the administration could not bring in a judge to work because there isn't even a place to stay, there's no courthouse, there isn't equipment for the courtroom or even police officers to work in the court. So, all this prevented the administration from trying to establish the old courts, including Bentiu, and bring in the judges for them.
Members of the UN Security Council are calling on South Sudan to hold perpetrators of sexual violence accountable. The latest reported incident involves at least 125 women and girls in the town of Bentiu. Such attacks have increased dramatically this year despite the signing of a peace agreement. CGTN's Daniel Ranches reports.
UN Security Council members are calling for justice for victims of sexual violence in South Sudan. The Netherlands said a recent report of sexual violence in Bentiu is a serious setback to the peace process. Aid workers say that some 125 women and girls, including pregnant women, children and the elderly, sought medical care after being raped, whipped and clubbed in a government-controlled area. The Secretary-General's representative on sexual violence in conflict, Pranila Patton, reported that there have been a total of more than 1,150 victims of sexual violence in 2018 alone, compared with just under 200 the previous year. She said girls as young as 4 had been raped in the country. Patton's calling for more resources to help provide medical and psychological services for survivors. She's urging the government of South Sudan to hold perpetrators accountable. South Sudan's permanent representative, Aki Bona Mawal, says a criminal investigation is underway and that a ministerial level report will be made public soon. Members of the Security Council also called for the establishment of a hybrid court. Other nations are calling for an end to the practice of forcible recruitment of child soldiers and detention of aid workers. Daniel Ranches, CGTN, Washington.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has reaffirmed China's diplomatic commitments to mutual benefits and respect for other nations' development paths. He delivered a keynote speech at a commemorative conference for the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up. President Xi said China cannot develop in isolation and that the world needs China for the sake of global prosperity. Now let's take a look at what the Chinese leader has said and what the country has done.
Respecting the right of the people of all countries to choose their own development path, uphold international fairness and justice. That is the basic tone Chinese President Xi Jinping has set for his country's cooperation with its international partners. Indeed, when seeking cooperation with African countries, China always puts the needs of the local people at first. For example, 92% of the global malaria death occurred in Africa. A decade ago, China donated more than 200 million renminbi of anti-malaria drugs to 35 African countries. In fact, China's first female Nobel Prize winner, Tu Youyou, used traditional Chinese medicine to discover a malaria treatment. Meanwhile, President Xi also stressed that China would never pursue development at the cost of other interests, but the country will also safeguard its legitimate rights. China's steady support for the Paris Climate Agreement can prove this point. Although the country is still in the process of industrializing, China keeps reducing its carbon emissions to improve the living environment for the world's next generation. At a commemorative meeting for the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up, the Chinese leader also made a commitment to the world. China will never seek hegemony. The Chinese government has put this into practice by promoting the Belt and Road Initiative. After 5 years of implementation, the proposal has brought tangible benefits to its participants, and China never linked this initiative with political purposes.
It gives each country that is trading with China an equal opportunity, not like other countries that is giving bully approach.
The president said China has moved closer to center stage as the widely recognized promoter of world peace, and his country will always uphold a foreign policy that insists on mutual respect while promoting common development.
Work to forge a new form of international relations featuring mutual respect, fairness, justice, and win-win cooperation.
Yang Zhao, CGTN.
The Nigerian Office of the International Organization for Migration, in collaboration with the government, have rolled out a campaign to help control migration in the country. The West African country is battling to limit the number of its citizens taking the dangerous desert and Mediterranean sea routes to Europe. CGTN's Deji Badmos reports on the efforts being made.
This is the latest group of Nigerian migrants flown back from Libya. They had been trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea into Europe but failed. Many had spent months under trying conditions in Libyan detention centers before the International Organization for Migration, or IOM, came to their rescue and brought them back home. More than 3,500 Nigerian migrants have been flown back from Libya this year alone. Many are still trapped there, and many more are still embarking on the dangerous trip. In partnership with the Nigerian government, the IOM is now embarking on a massive information campaign to educate Nigerians on the dangers of migration and why migrants should do it the right way. In the coming days, this campaign messages will hit the streets of Nigeria, providing citizens with better insights about migration.
I call upon all stakeholders, government counterparts, civil society organizations, community members, and migrants, former migrants, all together to work together to implement this global compact. Let us do our share to implement this very beautifully designed framework that will help us reap the benefits of migration.
When you migrate irregularly, you have the tendency to be trafficked. You have the tendency to fall victim to slavery. You have the tendency to be exploited. Labor-wise, sexually, there's sexual exploitation, labor exploitation. These are the dangers that accrue to you when you migrate irregularly. And then, of course, your human rights will not be protected.
Experts believe lack of information is at the heart of why most people embark on the dangerous journey to Europe through the desert and the sea. The Enlightenment campaign in Nigeria is therefore expected to make a difference.
This is going to inform the community on how they can actually source reliable information, where they can find it, how they should make informed decisions. It is going to inform them what the dangers are.
The IOM also organizes entrepreneurial training sessions for returnees as part of their reintegration process. Some returnees are now advocates against irregular migration and are expected to play a crucial part in this campaign. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Egypt is launching an enormous healthcare campaign. It is aiming to offer free checkups for 50 million citizens. The campaign is investigating hepatitis C infection and some other non-communicable diseases. Here's Adil Mahroui with more.
Dubbing it 100 million in health, Egypt is holding a massive campaign to eradicate hepatitis C. The country has the highest rates of the virus in the world. The health ministry is offering free tests nationwide. Scores turned out for the checkups.
We were astonished at the turnout. We didn't expect so many citizens will come. They wait in long lines for hours for their turn to come. It's been great. Earlier we toured Cairo districts to make them aware of the possible diseases and the importance of checkups. That may have been the reason.
The health ministry is targeting 50 million Egyptians. That's everyone above 18 years. Beside hepatitis C, the clinics also test for diabetes, checks for hypertension, and does a body mass index for every citizen.
75% of the cases are either overweight or have obesity-related diseases. That's a prime reason for hypertension and diabetes. Our main purpose is hepatitis C. The non-contagious diseases take a second priority. We're also creating a digital database for the patients in the process.
The campaign is also creating a digital database for those who've had the checkups. Those who've tested positive for hepatitis C should then be directed to the most convenient hospital for their treatment.
I did the examinations and thank God I don't have any disease. This campaign is wonderful. Many friends didn't know they had hepatitis C and they discovered because of that campaign.
The campaign is great. We want to make sure we're healthy. The results come out so fast. Doctors are treating all people nicely. My father had hepatitis C. He wasn't lucky to have such service.
All government health clinics offer the free tests. But to reach out for more people, mobile clinics are available in the streets at populous areas.
They need to increase the number of checkup trucks. So many people come. I've been here for 3 hours just to get my turn. It's a lovely idea. Most of us don't like to go to the doctors. To find a place like this is encouraging.
Egypt has raised more than $260 million from the World Bank to help in funding that massive project. The Egyptian Health Ministry says that so far 18 million Egyptians have been tested. The free tests and the checkups will continue until April next year. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And your business news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Dozens of African leaders gather in Vienna for the EU-Africa Summit. Stay with us.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
They collect $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The 40th anniversary of reforms and opening up in China has attracted sectors in South Africa. Malcolm Damon, the executive chairman of the South Africa's Economic Justice Network, has applauded China for the improvement and protection of lives in the process of reforms and opening up 40 years in the making.
It's quite amazing if one look at what's happening in China and what happened over the 40 years. Some of the few things that strike me is, one, the fact that you have 740 million people that were lifted out of poverty. Now that's a major achievement. A few years ago, the United Nations looked at the Millennium Development Goals. And actually, if one look at the goals around poverty and poverty reduction, China was the one country that stood out over the years, not only because of its economic growth, but the fact that its development focused on the development of the people. You see that the world is looking at how can they reduce pollution and have a more clean energy footprint. And it's clear that China is leading in that development through its solar development, through its green development, through its innovations, its commitment to the modernization of China, whether that modernization is in the area of the public transport sector or whether it's in the area of clean environment so that there's less pollution and we have a big impact on climate change. And in that sense, China is leading this innovation and development, finding a situation where the green economy benefits China, but also benefits the world.
Dozens of heads of state and government, foreign ministers and business leaders from the European Union and Africa have gathered in Vienna for the European Union-Africa Summit. The summit focuses on economic ties between the two sides. Roundtable discussions held today covered fintech, e-commerce, sustainable energy, investment in startups and connectivity on the African continent. CEOs from BMW, Vodafone and Siemens were in attendance. Migration was not on the official agenda of the summit, but it did emerge in comments from the chair of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat, and the AU chairman and Rwanda's president, Paul Kagame. Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz said that he wanted Europeans to recognize Africa as a continent of chances rather than poverty.
I hope very much that this forum contributes to changing our view of Africa, also within the European Union, so that Europeans not only think of poverty when they hear about Africa, but also of a continent of chances. I hope that European companies approach the African continent and recognize the chances of cooperation.
Unternehmen in Europa.
We are not going to measure success solely in terms of migration statistics. A much better yardstick is how creating high-quality digital jobs in Africa will also boost job growth in Europe.
Nigeria's Access Bank is set to acquire mid-tier rival Diamond Bank. As CGTN's Phil Ihaza explains, the merger is expected to create Africa's largest bank by customer base.
Access Bank has announced the acquisition of Diamond Bank to become Nigeria's largest banking institution to expand its current network of over 300 branches across Nigeria and a customer base of nearly 6 million. Access Bank operates across the African continent with an asset base in excess of $12 billion and shareholders' equity valued at approximately $1.86 billion. Not new to merger, the entire issued share capital of Diamond Bank through a merger scheme supervised closely by the Central Bank of Nigeria that will see both banks gain nearly 10% according to its current share price. Diamond Bank has recorded its lowest ever figures in profit before tax and sold off its West African operations to operate solely in Nigeria since it came under the management of its current Chief Executive Officer Uzoma Dozie, a son of the founder. A protracted dispute involving its leading in India also announced that its current Chief Executive Officer would step down after the merger. Now, both banks are also hoping that a potential merger, if finalized by the first half of 2019, will create Nigeria and Africa's largest retail bank by customers. Nigeria's economy came out of its first recession in 25 years in 2017, and local banks have been trying to raise more capital to make up for nearly $1 billion in bad loans. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Africa's largest power utility is struggling to keep the lights on in South Africa. Eskom has started yet another round of load shedding, that's the dry technical term for planned power cuts designed to relieve an overburdened electricity grid. Widespread calls for the government to look at the increased use of renewable energy instead of spending more money trying to save Eskom. CGTN Sumitra Naidu takes up the story.
Increasing renewable energy supplies will not only address South Africa's power supply problem, it will also help to reduce the country's carbon emissions. Green advocacy organization Climate Transparency recently released a report that found South Africa has the highest emissions intensity in the power sector amongst G20 countries due to its heavy reliance on coal.
The most important thing to understand is that the current coal-fired power stations that we are running are 1940s, 1950s technologies. The environmental emissions and water was never a major consideration during those days. Now those conditions are quite stringent, and therefore the new technologies that are out there are dry-cooled. They also, in terms of coal-based technologies, are being designed so they can use discard coal, and so they are actually improving the environmental footprint.
Spanish-based tech and engineering company Sener has invested over $57 million in renewable energy infrastructure in South Africa since 2013. It's currently running a pilot to synchronize renewable power to the national grid. Once complete, it will be able to supply Eskom with 100 megawatts of power, enough to provide electricity to 179,000 households.
We are able to store energy during the day, and in the evening we are able to then release that and produce electricity even during peak periods when the sun has already set. What CSP does is it enables you to be able to produce during peak periods, but also beyond that, if necessary.
The move from coal, though, will take time. South Africa is one of the largest coal producers in the world. It's not only Eskom that relies on the use of coal, the industry employs thousands of people.
Just transition is a very important concept, especially when understanding the South Africa's energy mix and how we move forward as a country. If you look at the history of South Africa, we are essentially a minerals-based economy, and a lot of our mining activities, a lot of our jobs and our development, our economy is driven by resources, coal being one of it. So to move away from it immediately with a step change is very difficult because there's a lot of livelihoods that are at stake.
While Climate Transparency labelled South Africa as one of the worst coal polluters in the world, it also gave credit to its ambitious plans to reduce carbon emissions. South Africa is about to implement a carbon tax and a carbon budgeting system as part of its new integrated resources plan. The ultimate goal is to limit coal use and increase renewable energy consumption by 35% over the next 12 years. Independent power producers are pleased with government's integrated resources plan, but they're still concerned about the lack of detail around concentrated solar power, which is storage capacity for renewable energy. In the meantime, IPPs are ramping up supply. The government, though, will need to show more commitment to help fund some of these alternatives. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg.
$5 billion firms in Africa. When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
To a raging controversy now over intellectual property rights. The Lion King has been a huge success ever since the 1990s, with the expression Hakuna Matata becoming renowned around the world. Now, many are raising concerns about Disney's right to profit from what they say is a cultural asset. Maria Galang reports from Washington.
The Lion King, a much-anticipated live-action remake. It's hit in cinemas around the world in 2019. It hasn't words. Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata. No worries, or something like that, right?
That means no worries.
For the rest of your days.
For the rest of your days.
Do you know what...
Were we right?
Yes, correct. Do you know where that's from?
Oh, I got this. Swahili? Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
I would say it would have to be from somewhere on the continent of Africa. Not specific. I don't know what specific country.
Hakuna Matata. What a wonderful phrase. Hakuna Matata. Ain't no passing craze.
It means no worries.
Made globally famous in 1994 by Disney's blockbuster hit, the catchphrase Hakuna Matata is actually Swahili, and it's used almost daily in parts of East and Central Africa.
It's also a lyric in the 1982 Swahili song Jambo Bwana by Kenyan group Them Mushrooms. Swedish pop group Boney M was among other bands that also recorded versions in the 1980s.
Jambo Bwana, you are welcome. Hakuna Matata.
And it's still performed today by hotel bands across East Africa. Recently, many Kenyans and other Swahili speakers were shocked to discover that Disney had trademarked the catchphrase back in 1994, mainly for merchandising purposes. Many are questioning Disney's right to profit from what they say is a cultural asset. Kenyan lawyer Liz Lenjo says cultural assets aren't that easy to define in a legal sense.
We have to investigate what do we mean by cultural assets. If we're going to talk about maybe a technique of bidding that we can say comes from, I don't know, the Taita community or the Maasai community, then that is different. But then again, the question of how can you identify this technique becomes another question.
This isn't the first time the issue of cultural asset appropriation has come up in the business world. Back in 2014, South Africa successfully stopped an attempt by France to trademark the name rooibos, which is the name of a red bush tea grown only in South Africa. But just because Disney has trademarked the phrase Hakuna Matata, does that mean it's totally out of bounds around the world?
So a Kenyan firm can use it. The question is where. Like I said, intellectual property is generally territorial. So you then look at, is it registered in my country? If it's not registered in my country, it's fair game. If the transaction has happened here and it's not happening in the US territory, then there's no infringement.
The issue of cultural copyright is still murky legal territory. But for Swahili speakers and other fans of the phrase Hakuna Matata outside US copyright zones, no worries. Or should we say,
Hakuna Matata.
Maria Galang, CGTN, Washington.
Well, let's get more now on this controversy. I'm joined in studio by Ogwang Omuga. He's the head litigation, policy development and training at WIFA Intellectual Property.
facing is we are directing our anger at the wrong party. Because for a long time, this thing has been held, and it has been one of the trademarks that has been defining Kenya globally. So while we are now reacting to what Disney has done, remember Disney is a private company, and at private company, their sole interest is how do they maximize on what they are doing as far as production is concerned. And the goodwill on Hakuna Matata would cross their market boundary even to Africa. So as at now, we are directing our anger to the wrong person.
But you say Kenya has trademarked it for ever since, but Kenya has not really claimed it.
No, it hasn't. No, we haven't. So what I would really want us to ask, what were some of our policy makers and some of the institutions in Kenya that are charged with overseeing some of the proprietary aspects that are selling us abroad? What are they doing?
So many are accusing across the continent are accusing Disney of colonization. What are your thoughts on that?
No, it's not colonization. This is a private business, a private enterprise, and their sole interest is largely on extending their reach as far as production is concerned. And Hakuna Matata tag will perennial forever, in perpetuity. It will seal the Disney's hold, especially when we are looking at the African market, because Hakuna Matata has a goodwill in Africa.
But this is an opportunity that African companies have missed, though. What are the lessons here for African companies? Because, as you put it, Disney is a private company wanting to maximize on some profits.
Exactly, exactly. What you will be shocked with, Beatrice, is that the extent of ignorance, especially whether in governance, whether in academia, whether at the marketplace, even in entertainment alone, you'll be shocked at the way we have not come of age to identify in whatever that we are doing as a people, what are the proprietary aspects, and one, should we take vigilance on whatever we own as at now in our practices? And so this is a wake-up call to all of us, especially in Africa, Kenya being the springboard of business in Africa. This is our wake-up call. That is it time that we should ask ourselves, in these things that we are doing as at now, whether in music, actually what is happening now is what has been happening, though they have been happening, but no one has been making noise about it. So Africa continent, we need to come alive and to be aware that in these things that we are doing, could we be losing out on the proprietary aspects?
All right, Gwang Muga, thank you very much for joining us on Africa Live.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for your thoughts. You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. African club champions ES Tunis secure a 5th place at the Club World Cup.